Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam, on this session on job hunting. If you are neurodiverse, take it away.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jenny. Well, if you're neurodivergent and you're job hunting, it can be pretty scary, that's for sure. Everything that you're struggling with all through your life in terms of communication and what's expected of you and whether or not your behaviours are appropriate, all of that stuff that neurodivergent lovelies like me, yes, I'm neurodivergent too, I'm autistic and I have ADHD and I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic as well, because I like all the labels. But what that has enabled me to do is, having worked for 25 years in corporate and tried to fit into that round hole, even though I'm a square peg, I discovered that actually there's some words of insight and wisdom that I can share with other neurodivergent folk and also to organisations to help them do better at employing us neurodivergent folk. So that's why I'm doing these kind of training sessions. It's all about sharing information and helping people along. Now, depending on where you are and what your neurodivergency is, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, you might find things in this session helpful. And please forgive me if you feel like I'm teaching you to suck eggs. It's not my intention to do that. I don't know what you know and you don't know what I know. So I'll just tell you what I know and you can take what you need. Now, there is a PDF that accompanies this and I'll just pop it into the chat now, and that will mean that you can read along if you need to. That might help depending on your learning styles, and also it's for you to keep. So that might have useful information in there that you can use. So if you can keep a digital copy, that would be fantastic. I'm sure the trees would be grateful. Yeah, so let's get cracking. The things we're going to cover today include what to look for in companies that are getting it right, job adverts and interpreting what they're really saying. We're going to talk about applications and asking for accessibility, interviews and those reasonable adjustments, questions you can ask interview, to disclose or not to disclose, those protected characteristics, apprenticeship versus employee, and a bit about inductions and onboarding and starting that ongoing conversation, you know, that first week of work. So let's start at the beginning. What to look for when you're looking for a company that might be getting it right, because that's great, isn't it? That they're already on that journey of understanding that in order to have diversity of thought, they need to have a diverse workforce. And the types of companies that are getting it right, maybe not 100%, but at least they're making great strides towards it, are places like Microsoft. So quite a while ago, I think 2015, something like that, Microsoft helped to put together the roundtable, the Neurodiversity at Work roundtable, which was to bring companies together to do this better. And certainly for the incoming cohort of new employees, they're given a mentor, a body, they're given opportunities to ask for the things they need, the reasonable adjustments to do their best. And they've changed the way that they do things like interviewing to accommodate them, where you might go along for a 4-day skills assessment instead of stuck in a room with a panel of 3 people staring at you. So they're definitely going in the right direction. Now, there are still stories of some people who have worked at Microsoft and they haven't had a great experience. But I think it takes time for these new practices to filter through, and Microsoft is a behemoth, huge company. So whilst it's not good to hear the stories of people where they've not enjoyed working there because their neurodiversity has not been acknowledged and respected, I think they're going in the right direction. So it's that sort of thing you're looking for. Have we got any articles, any blog posts, anything at all that points towards organisations that are doing things right? And part of that is I try to encourage organisations to post on their website stories of things that are going right. and a list of reasonable adjustments, accommodations, adaptations, so that people can see with their own eyes that this organisation is on the ball and is ready to receive neurodivergent employees, not because they're ticking a box or trying to fill a quota, but because they recognise that diversity of thought is the way to innovation, problem solving, creativity, all of that lovely good stuff that comes with a slightly differently wired brain, that kind of thing. So those are the kind of things I would say look out for, and just be wary that some are still paying lip service to it and not actually doing it. So if the sum total of an organization is I'd like you to do a computer-based training module when you first arrive for 20 minutes, you have to get 70% to pass, and then it's never spoken of again. And I've been there so many times when I've worked in organizations. I did a lot of temping for a while because I like variety. And every organization was like, here's your 9 computer-based training mandatory courses you've got to do, you know, on money laundering and sexual harassment and all sorts of stuff, and diversity. And then no one ever spoke of it again. It's like, tick. We've done all that we can, but it's an ongoing conversation. So we're looking for companies that are still talking about it. And even if you're feeling adventurous, you could try to find current employees, perhaps on LinkedIn or somewhere like that. And you could perhaps ask them, just DM them and say, hey, I'm looking at applying for a job here. What's it like? There's nothing stopping you doing that. They can always say, I'd rather not say, or whatever. Or they more than likely will say, oh yeah, I'll have a little chat with you. I'll tell you what it's like to work here. Because most people are nice and will. Okay, so let's move on to job adverts. And the interpretation of what they're really saying can be really tricky. Most adverts, and I'm generalizing here, are written by HR and given to recruitment companies. So recruitment companies don't actually have a lot of power when it comes to the wording and making sure that actually they're going to attract the right candidate. And quite often, in my experience, I'll speak in that way so I'm clear, I'm not generalizing. In my experience, the individuals in HR that write those are usually neurotypical people who don't understand that there's a slightly different language, a clearer language that's needed to attract a neurodivergent mind. Woolly stuff, hints, nuance, suggestions, read between the lines, doesn't really work for us with a different brain. And jargon in adverts really does turn people off. Everybody, really, everybody. And yet people still write adverts like that. I don't get it. I don't know. And then they wonder why they get 200 people applying and only 5 of them are actually any good fit for the job, because they've been so woolly about what they're asking for. But equally, whilst they're woolly on some things, especially when they say things like salary negotiable, run a mile. How do you know if you can pay your mortgage? You don't. So why would you apply? Just saying. They might say things like 6 years essential in this particular area. And what I've learned through questioning is that whilst you might have someone who's neurotypical want to apply for that job, if they had, I don't know, 5 years and some change, roughly, experience in that area, they'd apply. Absolutely. Well, that's nearly 6 years, isn't it? They'd have no problem at all doing that. And also, there's a difference in the way that different genders apply. And so someone who identifies as female is more likely to not apply if they feel they haven't got the full 6 years. And again, speaking in very general terms, those who identify as male may be a bit more maverick, a bit more gung-ho and go, hey, that's nearly 6 years, I'll apply. That'll be good enough. I'll win them over in the interview. So that's where a lot of differences lie in the way that they write things in adverts and the way that it attracts us to apply. So please do realize that when they say essential, most of the time they mean desired. So it shouldn't preclude you from applying. And if it does, it does, but I'm pretty sure it won't. As I said, I've applied for a lot of jobs in my life, and it's never been a problem. And quite often there'll be a great big long list of skills, especially in IT. You know, they'll want you to have Python, C++, you know, goodness knows what languages under your belt. They'll want you to have certain systems that you understand. They might want you to be a SharePoint expert, any number of different things. But actually, why would you come to a job without any training needs at all? Zero training needs. That doesn't make any sense, does it? So a selling point, if you like, is that you may have some of those skills, but what's really great is you're looking forward to developing your skills further in the role, and you're totally up for that training. Why wouldn't an employer want someone who's keen as mustard to develop their skill base whilst doing, you know, working on the job? I'd prefer to have someone like that working for me than someone who goes, I've got all of the qualifications and doesn't know how to apply them, perhaps doesn't have the experience to back it up. So it's not an exact science, but I would say, what have you got to lose other than the time it takes to apply? That's what I'm saying. So if you're keen on finding a job in IT and you're nervous about qualifying for it, go for it, is what I say, because you never know. You absolutely never know. In the PDF, and I'll just drop it into the chat again because we've had a couple of extra people join us. I've included some sort of humorous language cliches that we might see in various job adverts. So I'll let you read those at your leisure. They are humorous, but actually there's a bit of truth in some of them. You know, many true things said in jest. So there are some clangers to look out for. You know, when they say things like it's a fast-paced job, does that mean that they're going to give you unreasonable deadlines that you've got to try and meet, and you'll be expected to do unpaid overtime to meet them? Things like that, they are really out there. So it's worth having a look at those and being a bit more savvy. Savvy is the word I'm looking for, a bit more switched on and savvy to what they might actually be asking for or what actually they're saying. You know, when they say they're an up and coming company, is it two blokes who started a company last week? It's worth looking into and seeing exactly what you're coming into. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to the next section, which is about asking for accessibility when it comes to applications. There are lots of organisations who are moving towards an automated application process. I think it's awful. I think it's a really bad move. It's because they're lazy. I know, I'm going to put that out there. And it is because they don't want to read 200 CVs and covering letters. They want a computer to sift it for them. So they've only got 10 to read or something like that. And I think that's lazy because they're missing people's personality. They're missing the people side of it. They're allowing a computer to make a decision. And also for the dyslexics among us, especially, I know there's at least 2 of us in this room, it's very discriminatory because our grammar might not be on point. Our spelling might not be fantastically perfect today. It might be that we're coming across slightly differently than how we'd like to, because the written word is quite different from the spoken word. And if you're using dictation software to fill out your application form, so it's your words being transcribed, it's going to read differently to someone who sat down and took time over writing their weighty prose to impress their employer or potential employer. So it's going to have a whole different look and feel. So depending on how that Autobot is programmed, it could be sifting out people like us. And that's just wrong. That's discriminatory. So it's a big red flag for me. I much prefer organisations that do want to read my application form themselves. But like I said, especially in IT, they're becoming few and far between. So we might have to, I don't know, start a revolution or something. And also a lot of places will say, we don't want your CV, despite having spent a lot of money and time putting together the perfect CV. They don't want them. And they don't want to see your handwriting because everything's typed. And there's this real disconnect from how we used to employ people and how we do it now. Now, some organizations are trying to do better, and they're actually making their websites more accessible. And that can include things like screen reading options, larger text, different colored text on different backgrounds. And that's wonderful to see when they've taken the time and the effort to put in those accessibility points. So if you are having to apply online, they're trying to make it as comfortable for you as possible. Not all of them are doing it, but bit by bit, people are getting wise to it. And when I talk to an organization, I will urge them to look into this software as an addition to their website to make it more accessible. We don't want to be discriminated against. We don't want to feel like we're being discriminated against. We want to feel just like everybody else applying for a job, where the playing field is leveled. Got a really good analogy for you to share. So some people will say, oh, but if you have reasonable adjustments, accommodations, adaptations, accessibility, that's giving you an unfair advantage. I've heard that a few times. So I say to them, okay, so if I don't wear my glasses, I can't really see. I've got really poor eyesight. I'm -11 in both eyes, right? And if I put them on, they are an accommodation. They're a reasonable adjustment to my sight so that I can see. And if you're someone who doesn't wear glasses and you see just fine, does my wearing glasses give you a disadvantage? It doesn't, does it? What it means is I'm now at the same level you were already, and now we can do our jobs. That's exactly what reasonable adjustments, accommodations, and adaptations does. It actually gives those of us who need a bit of extra support one more step so that we're now on a level playing field with the individuals who don't need those adjustments. So it isn't an unfair advantage at all. It's a level playing field now. So it's a really great way to express it if ever someone tries to challenge you on it or argue why they don't do it. Good analogy. Most people know somebody who wears a pair of specs. Okay, let's move on to interviews and those reasonable adjustments. Now, because many individuals, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, experience some mental health issues like anxiety and possibly even depression, and they can be quite debilitating, we need to have really clear instructions and expectations laid out for us. And not all employers are great at it, so sometimes we have to ask. And I mean, a really quick win is immediately, just like Jenny did for me today, is send out a calendar invitation. So easy, isn't it? To make sure it's in my calendar at the right time. Now, I don't think I've ever seen an employer send out an interview calendar invitation, but wouldn't that be really handy to have it in your calendar with the location that you're going to, information about parking, the time that you're expected to be there, whether or not you've got to go through a security layer if you get to reception, who you're going to ask for. All of that information could be encapsulated in that appointment in your calendar, so you don't have to search through your emails to try and find it. It's just there. And for many people, lots of people have a digital calendar which they can access both on their laptop and on their phone. So they would have it with them when they were attending the interview, and they would be able to check it to make sure everything's okay. That's very comforting to have that with you. Such an easy thing to do. So a very reasonable adjustment to ask. If they haven't sent you one and you're going to an interview, you could ask them to do that. You could also ask them if they have got a list of reasonable adjustments and accommodations and adaptations. If they haven't, I wouldn't say it's completely a red flag, because a lot of organizations aren't quite there yet. It's whether or not they're open to discussing those reasonable adjustments. If they completely shut down and go, no, we don't have that, full stop, and they're not willing to explore any kind of needs that you might have, well, that's the red flag for sure. And what I mean by the red flag, if that's not clear, is that it's a warning sign that this might not be the right organization. It might not be a good fit for you. And as much as sometimes we might feel a bit desperate to get a job, we also don't want a job we're going to hate every day. We don't want to hear the alarm go off in the morning and feel sick in our stomach because we've got to go to work. That's not fun at all. If you work full time, you're working about a quarter of your life at work. So it's important that it's good quality and that you want to be there and you're respected. So certainly that meeting in person, the information, if they haven't given it to you, you might want to ask about whether or not there is parking nearby or on site. Do you have to pay? Certainly it gives me quite a lot of anxiety if I don't know what I can do with my vehicle if I'm going by car, or how close it might be to the railway station if I'm coming by train. And do I need to bring my own laptop? Do I need to bring my own refreshments? Is it an all-day thing? Is it a half-day thing? Is it an hour? You know, there's lots of information that I need so that I don't worry about the unknown. And it's perfectly reasonable to ask the questions you need to ask so that you don't worry about those things. And hopefully the person on the other end will be sympathetic and respectful and give you the information that you need. It might be that it's a phone call, if you can manage a phone call. I know that's very challenging for some people. Or it might be that you perhaps send an email with the questions clearly laid out and ask them if they can send you the answers. And that way, they're able to reply when they're able to reply. You haven't kind of put them on the spot. So it might work well for them too, because you never know, they could be neurodivergent too. Now, if it's online, just like today, I've said I don't mind if people have their camera off. I know you're there. Otherwise, why did you bother joining the meeting? And I know that it can be quite full on having lots of Zoom meetings all through the day. We'll want to be well lit, and we want to look at the camera and engage with people. And that takes quite a lot of energy. I'm going to have about a 2 or 3 hour break after this where I won't have any Zoom calls. I'll just quietly get on with a bit of work after some lunch. And that's the way that I manage my energy. It would be okay, I suppose, if I delivered this with my camera off and you would just hear my voice. But a lot of people need some visual information too. A lot of people read lips while we're talking. So it's just worth bearing in mind that if you're delivering something or in an interview situation, they might want to see you, not just because they want to see you and it's traditional to have everyone with their cameras on, but because they might need a bit of extra information from you whilst you're talking. And you shouldn't ever worry about the fact that you don't feel comfortable staring down the barrel of the camera. If you prefer talking like this and looking elsewhere whilst you're communicating, and you just explain that's your preference, it's much easier because it's overstimulating to look people directly in the eye. Most people will go, oh, okay then, and just let you carry on. Most people really aren't fazed by it. And if they are fazed by it, maybe it's not a good fit. And in terms of Zoom etiquette or Zoom registration, just making sure that you know when you're supposed to be there, what's expected of you. Are you going to have to do some kind of presentation? Because some interviews require a presentation of some kind. Are you expected to use slides? If those instructions are not clear, clarify with them well in advance. Don't leave it to the last minute. I know sometimes it's tempting to just, right, it's the day before or the morning before, and I'm just going to have a look at that and go, there's some information I don't know. Try to get the info up front, and then you can work on it last minute if that's your MO, your way of working. Because some people work really well under pressure. They thrive under that feeling of, I've got to get it done right now. There's no more choices. And other people like to work methodically, perhaps bit by day, revisit it, develop it, do things to it. So it's your choice on how you pull together your material for any kind of presentation, but know yourself and ask for the clarity of information well in advance, is my advice. Now, start times I'm going to mention specifically because it can be a bit of a problem. Some people are real sticklers for the start time. So if I say I'm going to start something at 9 a.m, they're there at 8:45 and they're expecting me to begin 9 a.m. on the clock. And they'll be, looking at their watch or imaginary watch or messaging me going, "Are we starting?" and things like that. It's an expectation that we are going to keep to time. And there are other people who will rock up at 9:10, and it could be for any number of reasons. They might have been in a meeting before this that overran. They could have been having technical issues. They could be struggling with some executive dysfunction today, which means that everything's going a bit wrong and they're late for everything. So as someone who is neurodivergent myself, who understands that these things might be happening, I choose to tell people a time that we're starting, but I ask people to be there before that time. So I will say we're opening the Zoom at 8:45 for a 9 a.m. sharp start. What you could say is that we're going to start at 8:45 and actually open the room up at 8:30 for the early birds, because that's when they'll come, and get them to do an activity of some kind, knowing that some people are going to arrive probably 5 to 9. So for that half an hour from 8:30 till 9, you're doing an activity with the people who are in the room and who are coming into the room. And then you will have that 9 o'clock sharp start. So there's a way of respecting people who are early and on time, and also accommodating people who really struggle with it because they're not doing it on purpose. There's a complete misnomer that people think that people are late because they're disrespectful or they're lazy or can't, manage their own time and whatnot. We know it's not true. And so if it hasn't been made clear by the organizer of the online meeting, then that's something you can ask about and say, so you say it starts at 9. Do you want us to be there by 9 because it starts on 9? Or do you want us to be there a bit earlier? Or are you actually going to start it at 9:15, but you want us to be there at 9? Because everybody seems to run their own Zoom and team meetings differently. It's worth exploring that and finding out exactly what is going on, so that you can try and manage your time appropriately and not miss the start of the main content. Whenever I'm doing any kind of training, I usually go for a 5 past start because I'm trying to accommodate those little hiccups that people have trying to get in the room. And if it's being recorded, that's fine. I can start on time because they can always watch the recording back later. Right, what else should I talk about to do with that start? Actually, yeah, I'm going to mention that whether it's online or whether it's in person, it might be that you need to have some objects that you fiddle with, or an object, or it might be that you need to play a game on your phone or something to help you listen, because a lot of people like to do something that's fun or creative in order to listen. I've got a whole bag of goodies in here. Let's see what I can get out of my bag. Oh, yeah, so I've got all sorts of squidgy toys. They tend to be quiet toys, not clicky toys, so that when I'm delivering training, I put them on the desk. They're also washable. I can disinfect them so I can use them again. But people can sit there and just muck about with them quietly, and it really helps them to concentrate. And that's not just neurodivergent people, I hasten to add. If I put them on the desk, everyone's playing with them. It's really interesting. It's not just neurodivergent people that might need that distraction, that physical touch of doing something. It might mean that actually they'll play with them for a while, but actually then they'll start doodling. Or it might mean that it might mean that they are putting those into a position and drawing them like an art class. I've seen that happen, especially when I give out blue tack. I'm looking there because normally I've got a big wodge of blue tack. Oh, it's over here now. Right, big wodge of blue tack is another tool. So you can take that, it's hard to start with, you have to really work it together, and you can make it into all sorts of different shapes, and it's quiet, there's no click, click, click or anything like that. And, you know, if you're feeling generous, people can take it home with them if they want to, because it's not easy to wash blue tack, I can tell you. But it's just, again, something worth thinking about, either to ask about, can I bring with me, or is it provided, or I need to let you know I will be fiddling with something, or I might be making notes on my phone, or I might be looking at my phone, but please know I am engaged, I am listening. In the same way as you might be doing things, those of you who've got your screens off, I don't know what you're doing, because you could be doing anything that you need to do to help you listen more easily, and that's absolutely fine. I want you to do what you need to do. So I've got a question in here. What do I recommend in a face-to-face job interview if you feel more comfortable having something in your hand to concentrate? Yeah, I got there in the end, Jenny. Brilliant. Yes. And again, if an employer has a problem with you having something in your hand to help you concentrate, I'm not sure I'd want to work for that employer if that's one of many things that they're having a problem with, or they don't provide a list of reasonable adjustments and they're all adding up, as they are not ready for a neurodivergent employee to ask for the support that they need. Hopefully they are. They're all getting a bit more switched on nowadays, and I'm going to put that down, otherwise I'll fiddle with that mercilessly.
Sam, Fatima's got a follow-on question from that, which I think is helpful for us. Would you recommend doing this during a presentation to help concentrate too? And if so, at what point should it be communicated, and how that that's what you're doing and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Jenny. So if I was giving a presentation, I don't tend to do fiddling while I'm presenting, only because there's sort of lots of things going on. I've got a couple of notes with me. I've got your Zoom windows open, so whether you're here and I can see you or not, I'm imagining you as an audience. I'm also keeping kind of a weather eye on the chat, so I've got quite a lot going on, so chances are I'm probably not fiddling with, but you might feel comfortable doing that. And I would be quite upfront about it and say, I'm probably going to fiddle with this whilst I'm speaking to you and delivering this presentation. Please let me know if it's getting in the way of my delivery or it's distracting to you. As you can tell, I've got the blue tack in my hand, but you could have it out of shot and people wouldn't know. If you're in person, obviously they're going to see it. And you could even just pick it up idly and play with it and not say a word. Lots of people fiddle with things and don't say a word, but be mindful that some people might find it distracting if it's in shot, and certainly make sure it's not a noisy object, because that will be very distracting indeed. So if it really helps you concentrate to do it in a presentation, then there's no reason why you shouldn't. And like I say, you can just choose how you do it. And some of it's about getting the vibe in the room and sort of feeling, do I feel like I'm safe to say, I'm just going to fiddle with this while I'm talking to you. So if you see my arms moving around, that's what it is. And then just move on. And certainly don't ask if you can. I don't know, please, can I play with this while I give you my presentation? Nope. You don't need their permission. You're telling them. For sure. Okay. So I think I've covered all of those bits as much as I wanted to. Let's keep my eye on the time as well. So I've put in the PDF a list of 14 questions that you can ask. All of them are respectful. All of them are questions that if they balk at them, and what I mean is if they kind of go like really shocked and that just might mean that they don't expect it. It might not mean that they are against answering it, or that they are resistant, or it might just mean they don't have the information in front of them, because they might not have expected you to ask that question. So when I ask things like, can you tell me about any specific projects or campaigns the company are especially proud of? I might be being interviewed by someone who's been in the job for a month, who doesn't know what the company did, a year ago. So they won't be able to answer that question necessarily. Or it might be that if I ask about attrition or turnover of staff, because I want to find out, how is the company evolving? Is it growing? Is there a big turnover of people? Because that's a bit of a red flag to me. If there's a big turnover, people are joining and leaving quickly. Why? That kind of information they might not have to hand, but they will know roughly, even if you narrowed it down to just their team, if they're the team leader and they're interviewing you and you say, so, how many people have joined and left this team in the past year? That's not unreasonable to ask, just so you can get an idea of how long has the team been together. And you can ask them questions. It's not all one way. We're sort of trained to think of interviews as being one way, where they ask us a load of questions to find out if we're right for the job. But we have to remember, we're interviewing them too. We're about to give a quarter of our lives to them. So we need to interview them and make sure it's a good fit for us. So the questions like, so what do you enjoy about your job? It might stall them just for a second because they might not expect it, but don't you want to know? And asking them questions like, how would I impress you in the first 3 months of working here? You get a real idea of what is their expectation of you. Or is it that they come back and say, well, you're going to be in a 6-month probationary period when you start here. So our expectation is that you're going to find out about your job, get your knees under the table, make the connections you need to, and start taking on a couple of projects. That's useful information to know, what the expectations are of me as your new employee. It might be there's no probationary period, you're straight in and they're expecting you to take on 27 projects on day 3. Good to know. But then at least if that's what I'm signing up for, I know. And you don't have to ask all these questions. I'm just going to lay that out there. Please don't just copy this list and go to your next employer or next interview and go, right, I've got 14 questions I'm going to ask you. You don't need to do that. And some of these might have been answered throughout your interview as well. So be careful not to ask a question that has clearly already been answered, because that means you weren't listening. That's what they'll take from that. And you might just pick 2 or 3 that you feel, yeah, I'm comfortable asking that question. You can still take them with you, all 14, but just pick, say, 3 questions to ask. You don't want to interrogate them as much as you don't want to be interrogated either. So it's that finding that balance. So hopefully those questions are helpful to you, because it gives you a real sense of, because they'll always ask you, have you got any questions for us at the end? Always. And it's so lovely to have something to ask. And some of these they wouldn't have answered. They might have answered things like, where's the company going in the next 5 years, do you think? They might have said, this is the future direction we think we're going in. But they certainly probably wouldn't have told you what you could do to impress them in the first 3 months of working there, for example, or a story of how they have supported a team member who needed support. I'm sure they wouldn't just offer that up. So they're good questions to ask. So the next section is about disclosure. And there is no requirement under UK law to disclose. It's a personal choice, whether you do or whether you don't, and also when you disclose. The caveat to that is there are some organisations out there who have written into their employment contract that you must disclose at the point of signing the contract in order to access reasonable adjustments, etc., because they're still of the opinion that it's an unfair advantage to have those extras, those adjustments, those support needs met. And I would say that's a red flag. That's probably don't want to work for them. They're not as far on as I'd like them to be in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so if I was applying for a job right now I probably wouldn't disclose at application level because I have a concern about unconscious bias. And I don't know who's reading this. Does this person who's reading my application, if it is a person rather than a bot, if I get through the sift and there's a person reading it, if they read that I'm autistic and I have ADHD, they might have some previous preconceived perceptions about what that means. They might know someone who has ADHD who's a manic nightmare to be around, and they might think, oof, no, they've got ADHD, we don't want them here, we can't cope with that, that will ruin the team dynamic. Not knowing that yeah, I can have my manic periods, but now I'm 50, I'm probably not going to bring them to work. Or at least not show them off. I'll find ways of being more discreet about that, because I know that most organizations, they're just not ready for it. I might choose to disclose at the point of interview, because I might be asking them those questions about reasonable adjustments. How many neurodivergent staff do they already have? And then I might disclose towards the end of the interview. You might be wondering why I'm asking these questions. It's because I'm autistic and I have ADHD. And there might be a couple of things I need support with. But I'll always start with the things that I'm really good at. Like I'm great at creation sort of activities. So if they need ideas, I can give you ideas for days. If you need somebody to facilitate a problem solving session, I'll actually find it quite difficult not to jump in and start solving the problem with you, because I'm all about problem solving, process improvement, finding efficiencies, looking at patterns and trends. That's my jam, baby. And that's why I go for those kind of jobs. Organizing other people, all that sort of stuff. I'm good at it. And I might have a couple of support needs around that. I might need a little bit more time or clearer instructions when someone's giving me a new task. I might need to go through it a couple of times before it's fully embedded in my brain, rather than just, here's one set of questions, off you go, and an expectation I'm just going to do it. So I will usually couch the needs that I have by starting with the fabulousness they're going to get first. Everybody feels very fabulous when they're neurodivergent. They might actually struggle to think of the things they're good at because they've been told they're rubbish most of their lives, or not very good at things, or you're going to end up stacking shelves in Tesco or whatever. Well, do you know what? I did stack shelves for a bit. I did a stint on the till, worked in a pub. I was a secretary, PA, and then I went into IT, business management. I did risk management, governance, all that sort of stuff, which leans to my strengths. And decided that actually it was too much stress. The expectations were far too high. They wanted so much more from me than I could deliver. And that's why I decided to leave. And it might be that at some point you decide to do the same, just because actually working for yourself, either as a consultant or running your own business, might end up being exactly what you need. Yes, it's hard. I won't lie. It is hard. And especially if you're neurodivergent, it can be really tricky. But I would say going to work for other people is a fantastic experience. You learn so much from other people, from your peers, from your superiors, from any subordinates you might have, depending on what level you're at. You learn so much about people, behaviors, interaction, and communication. So if I was going to do my life over again, I would still go and work for someone else for 25 years, probably, before I started my business, because I got a really good insight into how humans operate, and that's valuable information. So I'm not telling you all to stuff your job and go and start your own business. I'm saying go do the job first, then go and start your own business if that's what you want. Now, the last bit I wanted to talk about was the apprenticeship versus employee thing. And there's something about, unless you know what an apprentice is, some people think it's, someone who rocks up and just makes the tea and watches other people do their job. But actually, it's a really valuable way of getting experience in a specific industry. And it's also a great way for employers to try out people. And it's quite low cost for them, because an apprentice isn't usually paid very much. It's very much minimum wage. But you both get to try each other out. So you will find out, do I want to work here? Would I like to apply for a permanent job here? Or actually, I don't really like working here, but I do have a clearer idea of what I do want, because that's valid too. It might just be, this is where you get all your skills and training done with a view to moving on to a different organisation that you've got your eye on, that you needed to have better qualifications to get into. And that's okay too. But certainly there's an expectation if you come on as an employee that you know something already. So there's a real advantage to coming in as an apprentice and learning everything from the ground up, because usually there isn't an assumption that you know stuff first. It can last from like a few months to a maximum of a year placement usually. And I'm not 100% sure whether or not you're allowed to do more than one apprenticeship, but I can't see why you wouldn't be allowed to. I'm not sure. Jenny, would you know that?
I don't know, but I do know that a lot of the graduate trainee schemes are highly oversubscribed. So, for example, there's 1,000 applicants for 1 or 2 or 3 places. So I think whilst it could be really valuable not to spend all of your time trying to get onto one, to find whether a company is right for you. I think arranging information interviews would be another way that you could do that. I do have a student who's done a couple of graduate apprenticeships, but they're in different careers, not in the same career.
Right, brilliant. Thanks for that, Jenny. That's helpful. Now, of course, an apprenticeship is a qualification compared to, say, internships, which is usually purely work experience. And if any of you are planning on working overseas, particularly somewhere like America, unfortunately, most internships are unpaid, I've learned, which is just shocking. They're literally getting people into work for nothing in the hope that they'll get work experience, which will lead to a future job somewhere, which is just, yeah, I don't think that's ethical, but I'm not in America. So apprenticeships are brilliant because you do get paid whilst you're working, even though, as I said before, it might not be quite as much as someone who's a full-time employee. But it is that combination of training and experience. So it really sets you up for a good thing. But as Jenny said, there's more people than apprenticeships. And so it is hotly fought over. And a lot of organizations are also doing graduate schemes. So Capgemini, I used to work for, and they had different schemes. They had the graduate scheme and they had the apprenticeship scheme. And that allowed people to come in from school, they'd do work experience with us, and then they'd be quite excited about Capgemini and go, yep, I want to come in and do an apprenticeship, or I want to join the graduate scheme. And that's how they would get their foot in the door, and that's how they would get to know, like, and trust the employee, and vice versa, the employer. And interestingly, quite a lot of people would stay for a year or two after they'd finished their apprenticeship or their graduate training, and then they'd leave. I don't think it was anything that Capgemini did wrong specifically, let me make that clear. I just think that they managed to make their mind up more clearly about what they did and didn't want. And I think that's really useful. We don't have to think of the job we're going for as the job for life anymore. In fact, the job for life, there's not many out there anymore. The only ones I can think of off the top of my head tend to be people who are craftspeople who will learn their trade over decades. Perhaps a horologist who fixes clocks, for example. That might be a job for life because that's their calling. But on the whole, when you're working for corporate organizations, people will expect movement, as in from job to job. If they were faced with someone who had a CV that says they've been working for 15 years in one company, gone are the days where they go, wow, that's great, you've been there for 15 years, that's a real solid worker. The view seems to be now, 15 years, how come you haven't moved around? Why did you stay there? Are you not ambitious? You know, the different questions. I remember 20 years ago, I'd done a few jobs where I'd done it 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. And they were like, oh, you're a real job hopper, aren't you? You can't settle down anywhere. And now people are doing 2 years, 3 years and moving around quite regularly. And it's perfectly acceptable. So it's a sign of the times. It's just the way it goes. So it's just good to bear in mind that it's okay. You don't have to stay there forever. You're not committing your entire life to it. It's a bit like when people go to university and you think, well, I've gone to university to study law, so I guess I'm going to be a lawyer for the rest of my life. Like, well, no, you don't have to be, actually. And it's nice to know you've got options. So lastly, I wanted to talk about inductions and onboarding, and that's starting that ongoing conversation with your employer. So you've read your job application or your job advert, you've made your application, you've got through there, you've somehow got your interview, somehow got through your interview, and now you've been offered the job and you've got your first day, so you're in. I know, it's so a real labor of love, but you're in. But certainly, depending on your needs and your neurodiversity or not, whatever it is that is your need at work to be the most productive, best version of yourself you can be, it's up to you when you start that conversation. But I would suggest that you start the conversation early. Be upfront, be honest. I think your team leader would really appreciate it. And you'll be able to get some of those kind of boundaries in place early on. This is how much I'm willing to do or able to do. I can't go beyond that place at this time. Maybe it's identifying a training need. Maybe it's something that I will have to get comfortable with so that I can move that barrier a little bit further forward. It also, I would say, is essential that you find out other people's communication preferences. So many misunderstandings, grievances, difficult conversations, all of those horrible things that happen in corporate happen because of a communication hiccup, if you like. It could be an email that was misinterpreted. It could be someone who was copied in who shouldn't have been. It could be that someone was interrupted when they were doing something really difficult. It could be that someone wants to be rang on the phone because that's their preferred way of communicating with people, but all people do is email them, and it really gets on their nerves and they hate emails. So it's a really good idea to find out from each individual that you are going to work with, your touch points. How do you like to be communicated with? I used to have a book at work, a day book, and on the back I would have people's names and I'd jot down how they like to be communicated with and how they like a drink. I don't mean alcoholic, I mean, do they like tea, coffee, something else? And how do they take it? So that if they came to visit our office, I could just sort them out a cuppa. And they really appreciated that. It made them feel really valued and respected. It's just a very small thing, but we will often ask people how they want their drink, but we won't say to them, so do you prefer an email or would you prefer I just rang you? It's so simple, isn't it? And whilst we might not enjoy being on the phone, if we want something from somebody else and they prefer to talk on the phone, we might just have to suck it up and ring them. Yeah, I know, it's not great, but sometimes we just have to do the things that we need to do to get the job done. And some of that is stepping outside of our comfort zone to do that. We can't just stay in our bubble and say, this is what I am, I'm never going to change, and you've all got to accommodate me. That will never work. What will work is an honest dialogue backwards and forwards saying, this is what I can do and this is what I need help with. And I would also recommend, because I'm pretty sure everyone's got a mobile phone of some description, that you ask if you can record meetings. I would just say, just use the audio app that comes with the phone and just explain that there's a lot of people who have challenges with short-term memory. I'm one of those. And there's lots of people who need to hear things more than once so that they can really go in, because they don't always catch everything first time around. Or they might even want to make comprehensive verbatim notes for themselves, where it's really, really clear exactly what instructions are or what someone said or a decision that's been made or an action that's been given. And not everybody will back that up with an email saying, Thanks so much, Jenny, for our meeting today. That was great. I'm just listing the actions I think we've agreed on in this meeting. 1, 2, 3. Let me know if you've got any issues with that or anything to add. Thank you. That's what I do after a meeting with somebody, so that we are definitely both on the same page. But I might not remember all of those if I hadn't recorded it and re-listened to it. Most people are fine with saying, yes, you can record it, no problem at all. I wouldn't do it secretly. I'd be upfront about it and say, I'd like to just record the audio because I want to make some comprehensive notes later on. Is that okay with you? I've yet to come across someone who says, no, you can't record me. You know, if your intentions are good, then it'll be all right. And then if you are struggling, I'd suggest that you do talk to your team leader straight away, nip it in the bud, explain the situation whilst you're still calm. Don't wait till you have a meltdown or a shutdown, or it's just getting really upsetting, or you feel sick about coming to work, or you're trying to avoid someone. Don't wait till it gets that far. Talk to your team leader, consult with them. Consider them to be the person who's going to help you thrive at work. They want you to thrive because you'll make them look good. So they're on your side to help you. And finally, it is up to you if you disclose. If you want to get a diagnosis on the NHS, if you can get through your gatekeeper GP, I couldn't, then you might have a very long waiting list. Someone told me a very harrowing number today. In some areas of the country, people are waiting 7 years on the waiting list to get a diagnosis. And certainly in my area, the waiting list is over 2 years. And even then, there's no guarantee you'll get one, because it depends what psychiatrist that you get and whether or not they specialise in that area. So I saved up my pennies and I went for a private diagnosis myself, but it took me 2 years to save up because it was £1,500 for autism and ADHD. But now I've got it, I feel such validation for myself. I'll probably never ever show that document to another human being. It was for me, it wasn't for anyone else. And that was my choice. But you do not need a formal diagnosis in order to get the support needs that you might have for work. So that's pretty much it. It is exactly on the dot of 30, but I can stick around to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was a really excellent session. I have learned so much, and I'll certainly incorporate a lot of that into our career support and resources. Feel free to take yourself off mute or to put your questions in chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that was a fantastic session. It's given me so many like takeaways that I can apply. I've also been quite afraid or scared to kind of disclose dyslexia, even for the job I work now. In the application process, I suppose it's something that's come to mind, but I've always felt like, well, I'll probably be biased for this. But knowing that I can bring later and get that support and know that like I deserve that, and like it's not just about them like me just being in the job just to do something, but I'm a valued member and I'm someone who deserves to be there. And I think sometimes when you are dyslexic or you have any type of neurodiversity, I suppose you can have that part of you that has like a bit of imposter syndrome, like, well, maybe I just shouldn't say anything, or oh, I'll just figure it out, because I suppose you kind of learn to just adapt and find ways to, like, I suppose, not come across like you need more or you don't want to be like an inconvenience. But it just reminded me to just like be bold, be confident, like it's cool.
Because remember, you're only asking for the equivalent of a pair of glasses.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it was really helpful. Thank you.
Cool, you're welcome. Thanks, Sapphire. Cool. Well, if any other questions pop up in people's minds, because I might have kind of blown their heads with all the information, then maybe you could pass them to Jenny and Jenny can pass them to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that pop up after this. No problem at all. Otherwise, I think we're there.
Thank you. And Sam will be joining us in a month's time to talk about, do you want to give a quick brief overview of your session? Do you have it to hand? Or
I do, yes. It's neurodiversity in work or at work in tech. So we're going to talk about possible problems encountered at work, and we're going to talk about those reasonable adjustments, accommodations and adaptations in more depth. Examples of companies that are getting it right, and starting difficult conversations, giving and receiving feedback, presenting a business case if you want to make some kind of improvement, and covering off the communication question a little bit more deeply as well. So it's sort of like going a little bit deeper from here. So now you've got the job, what happens when you're in the job?
Super. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you everybody for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.